What is up, YouTube? Thanks for joining me. Today we are looking at another user-requested sound, and we're heading a little bit more into the nighttime direction, and I'm going to be attempting to recreate a Mad Tribe style lead. Let's have a look at what I've got so far. So the sound design concepts behind this lead are nothing new to my channel. I've kind of covered the bases pretty much on previous videos, but I think today's task is to kind of put together a couple of the sound design techniques to create a sort of layered sound. So as you can see, I created the sound using two layers, both with Serum and then grouped into a group channel, which I then applied processing and stuff like that. These two MIDI channels are playing the exact same MIDI notes, so you don't really have to do too much there. But what I'll do is I'll recreate the sounds from scratch, and then I'll copy the MIDIs over so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So the first layer we're going to be tackling is kind of the more sort of robotic sound in the lead. That's obviously created using frequency modulation, or FM. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a basic shapes over here on this side. Actually going to open it up on both sides. This side we're going to change to the saw. So oscillator A is going to be a saw and oscillator B is going to be a sine wave. We want to turn the randoms down on both of these. And I found the phase over kind of like around there sounded the best. So octave of oscillator A we'll set to -2 and octave of oscillator B we'll set to -3. And then let's set this warp mode of oscillator A to FM from B. Set about 75 to 80%. Cool, let's listen to what we've got so far. Cool, so that's the sort of robotic tone in the lead. And then the filter that is being used there is a band pass filter. So let's set this to band 24, set the resonance up a slight bit, turn up the drive and the fat over here to about halfway like that. So then here, I turned the mix down to about 95%, just so that there's a little bit of the sort of original sound coming through that's unfiltered to kind of layer the filtered sound on top. I'll show you a quick reference of what I'm talking about. It kind of gives it that phasey sort of effect when you sweep the cutoff. Let me just turn this mix to all the way so you can hear the difference. So depending on the kind of sound that you want, if you want a clean sweep like that, then you'll probably want to leave the mix at 100%. But for this type of sound, it's not a clean sweep. There's a lot of sort of all the frequencies are still coming through. So anyway, here what we want to do is we want to turn this level of oscillator B all the way down so that we're not hearing any of that sine wave. We're just hearing the sort of robotic tone that's created by the frequency modulation of oscillator A. So now let's move over to our effects. Here, what I did is I just put on the compressor, turned up the gain ever so slightly, and then turned down the mix to just over halfway, just to kind of bring together the sort of low frequencies and the high frequencies so there's not too much difference in the volume when we're sweeping through that cutoff like that. And then I added a little bit of reverb, set it to plate, and then turned the mix down quite somewhat to about 5%. Turn this low cut up a little bit to cut out the low frequencies. Maybe turn the pre-delay and the size down a little bit. Cool, so then there's not too much modulation going on with this layer. I just turned the sustain of the envelope and the decay down of the volume envelope just to give it more of a sort of plucky sort of sound, which works especially well if you're creating these kind of fast gated MIDI patterns. So we've created that sound, so now let's have a look at the MIDI. I'm gonna pop this up on the screen and then you guys can just kind of copy it. So what's happening here is I've obviously transposed the MIDI track +5. So that means the key of the track is in F. So I'm going to want to transpose this Serum channel that I just created over here before I copy these MIDIs over. You can pause the video if you need. So then the idea is to record in a sort of quick MIDI automation for that cutoff and get it sweeping sort of up and down. If you don't get it right the first time, you can always go in and actually edit it to exactly how you want it. But I kind of like to record it in either with a MIDI controller or with the mouse because it gives you much more of a sort of flowy, humanized motion to the automation rather than kind of clicking it in with a mouse, and it gives it much more of a sort of robotic kind of feel. So I guess it kind of depends what you want there. Cool, so that's layer 1. Let's move on to layer 2. So just to make things a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this Serum channel. And we can actually just mute this original one, and let's just turn off the read automation so that it's not doing crazy stuff with the cutoff. And we can jump in over here and we can just init the patch. So now we've got a default saw wave playing. So as you noticed with the original sort of FM layer, when you sweep through the cutoff frequency, it starts to kind of have these gaps in the frequency range, and I like to use a saw wave, or specifically a super saw or unison saw wave, to fatten up that sound and to kind of fill up the gaps. And I'll show you quickly how I do that. It's a very simple patch that I create to kind of layer underneath it. So let's just turn this saw wave down, -2, and let's turn on 9 voices of unison. And then let's turn the blend down a little bit and the detune down a little bit so it's not as kind of prominently sort of detuned. I like to use a high pass filter on this layer so that it doesn't have that kind of same drastic effect as the band pass from the previous filter. And this one we can leave at 100. Let's turn up the drive to about there. I think that's how I set it. And then also quite some resonance boost over like that. So with this layer, I created some hard clip distortion, turned it up to about 70% or so, and some reverb again. Cool, so then I read-enabled the automation again, so it's going to follow the same sort of movement, and suddenly realized that the cutoff sweeps beyond the range of what I wanted to. So here what we can do is we can actually go into the MIDI of this track, and let's just select all of these nodes. And you can actually use either this button over here that scales vertically and adjust it to exactly how you want it. With a high pass filter, I don't want it to go all the way up. So let's just kind of scale it down to about 50% of what it was. And you may also want to go to this side over here, which is scale around the center. And what that does is it kind of adjusts the gain sort of the automation, if that makes sense. So I like to adjust those two to fit the exact sound that I just created. So let's play through this and adjust those until we get the perfect sound. Cool, that sounds good. So you get that kind of like filter effect, but it doesn't sweep all the way out of the sort of audible range. So now we've got our 2 layers. Let's look at processing these layers, putting them into a group. So let's listen to these 2 being played together. And we might just want to adjust the volumes of those 2 to kind of get them to sit nicely together. So there's a lot of low frequencies coming through in this synth, and it kind of overlaps the other synth quite a bit. So what we can do is we can actually apply a bit of EQ here. And I actually want to notch out some of this frequency around here, I think it is. Cool, now let's pop these into a group channel. So we can select both channels and head over to our mixer and then just right click over here and add group channels to selected track. And let's just call it synth group. And then we can put them all into a folder together, all nice and neat. Call that synth group again. And I like to use quadrifuzz, specifically when you're dealing with synth layers, because it allows you to kind of isolate specific frequency bands. So if you've got areas which are sort of clashing or areas which are lacking, you can either sort of add like saturation to fill out the mix or to kind of like smear the mix a little bit to kind of create sort of less, how can I say, complex waveforms in those sections. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I see it. But anyway. So this sound has a kind of pretty nasty sort of low mid-range. So I kind of want to smooth that out with a tube distortion. Let's just turn that to around there. Let's turn some distortion on about there for this layer and put some amp simulation for our top layer. Let's have a listen to this. Like I said, you can tweak it to your taste, and then I use some delay. Let's just put on color copy. I love the sound of it at the moment. I turned the mix down quite a bit. I think I left it pretty standard like this. You may want to apply some EQ again after you've distorted the sound with quadrifuzz or with any sort of multiband distortion that you're using, just based on the fact that it can add a lot of harmonics or harmonic distortion to the sound, then sort of bringing in a couple of the frequencies that you may have cut out using the equalizer before it. So you may just want to equalize it again, which is what I just did here. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. So that's all for this week. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. As always, both of these presets are going onto my Patreon for my $5 Patreon supporters. If you want to know what that's all about, head on over to the link, which is somewhere on the screen at the moment. As always, if you like what I do, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up or like button, whatever you call it these days. See you guys next time.